My wife cheated on me with her cute trainer at the gym. I never thought I'd be posting here, but my life has been flipped upside down in ways I never imagined. My name's Mike. I'm 35, and I've been married to Jessica, 32, for 8 years. On the surface, we had a great life, a cozy home in the suburbs, 2 dogs who are practically our kids, and stable jobs that kept us comfortable. We weren't perfect, but I thought we were solid. I thought she was solid. Turns out, I couldn't have been more wrong. Jessica's always been into fitness. When we met, her dedication was one of the things I admired most about her. She'd hit the gym like clockwork, plan healthy meals, and somehow convince me to join her on weekend hikes, even though I'm more of a sit-on-the-couch-with-a-beer kind of guy. I loved her drive, her discipline. It was inspiring. But over the past 6 months, something shifted. It wasn't obvious at first, just small things that, looking back, were clearly the start of everything unraveling. For one, she started spending way more time at the gym. She was already a regular, but suddenly she was going twice a day some days, claiming her trainer, Matt, was helping her prep for a fitness competition. "Matt's a genius," she'd say. "He knows exactly how to push me without overdoing it." I didn't think much of it at first. It made sense, she had goals, and Matt was helping her reach them. But then the little things started piling up. She became glued to her phone, always tilting the screen away from me or locking it the moment I walked into the room. Jessica was never secretive before. She'd even hand me her phone to text her friends back if she was busy. Now, if I so much as glanced at her screen, she'd snap, "Why are you being so nosy?" or laugh it off with, "Don't worry, it's just boring girl talk." Then there were the late nights. Her gym sessions stretched longer and longer, and when I'd ask about it, she'd have a ready excuse. "Matt's running me through drills," or, "We're reviewing my progress for the competition." At first, I admired her commitment, but after a while, it started feeling excessive. She'd come home exhausted, barely say a word to me, and crash. She also started dressing differently for the gym. Jessica's always been stylish, but she swapped her usual tank tops and leggings for tight, flashy outfits that left little to the imagination. When I teased her about it, asking if she was working out or putting on a fashion show, she rolled her eyes and called me insecure. The first real red flag hit when we were out for dinner with friends. One of them joked about how much time Jessica spent with Matt, and Jessica's face turned bright red. She laughed it off, saying, "Well, he's just that good at his job." But there was something in her tone, too defensive, too forced, that stuck with me. A week later, I overheard her talking on the phone late at night. I couldn't make out much, but her voice was soft, almost flirty, and she quickly hung up when I walked into the room. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Oh, just Stacy," she said, naming one of her gym buddies. "We were talking about the competition." I didn't push it, but something didn't feel right. The final straw came one Thursday evening. Jessica had been at the gym for hours and wasn't answering her phone. She'd promised to be home by 7:30 so we could have dinner together, but by 9 o'clock, there was still no sign of her. I wasn't trying to be overbearing, but something in my gut told me to go to the gym and check on her. When I got there, the place was nearly empty. A few people were still on machines, and the front desk staff gave me a polite nod as I walked in. I scanned the room but didn't see Jessica. I figured she might be upstairs or in one of the back areas, so I wandered around. That's when I saw Matt. He was standing near the women's locker room, looking nervous as hell. He kept glancing around like he was waiting for someone or didn't want to be seen. My stomach twisted, but I tried to convince myself I was overthinking it. Then, Jessica walked out of the locker room. Her hair was messy, her cheeks flushed, and she was adjusting her clothes like she'd just thrown them back on. She froze the moment she saw me, her face a mix of shock and guilt. "Mike? What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice unnaturally high. I stared at her, then at Matt, who had suddenly decided his phone was the most interesting thing in the world. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I could ask you the same thing," I said, my voice steady but cold. We had dinner plans. Remember? Jessica laughed nervously, avoiding my gaze. Oh, I must have lost track of time. Matt and I were just going over some stuff for the competition. In the locker room? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Her smile faltered. Well, it's quieter back there. We needed to talk without interruptions. I didn't respond. I just looked at her, then at Matt, who was still pretending to be invisible. My gut was screaming at me that something was wrong, but I didn't want to make a scene. Not yet. Right, I said finally. Let's go home. Jessica hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She said a quick, awkward goodbye to Matt, and we left. The ride home was silent, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. By the time we pulled into the driveway, I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. The moment we walked through the door, Jessica headed straight for the kitchen, mumbling something about needing water. I stood in the entryway, watching her fumble with a glass, her back to me. She was stalling, and we both knew it. Jessica, I said, my voice steady but firm. We need to talk. She froze for a moment, then slowly turned around, holding the glass of water like a shield. About what? She asked, feigning confusion. You know exactly what, I replied. What was really going on at the gym tonight? And don't give me the competition prep excuse again. Her face went through a series of emotions: surprise, frustration, and then something that looked a lot like fear. Mike, you're being ridiculous. I told you, Matt and I were just talking. In the women's locker room? I shot back. Come on, Jess. Do you really expect me to believe that? Her eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms defensively. Why are you acting like this? You've never been the jealous type before. Is it so hard to believe that I'm working hard on something important to me? It's not jealousy, I said, my voice rising slightly. It's the lying. The secrecy. The fact that I find you sneaking out of a bathroom with your trainer looking like you just. I stopped myself, not wanting to finish the sentence. Her defensiveness morphed into indignation. Wow. Just wow. So now I'm not even allowed to have a male trainer without you jumping to conclusions. Do you even hear yourself right now? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Jess, this isn't about Matt being a guy. It's about the way you've been acting, hiding your phone, staying out late, changing your behavior. And tonight? That was the tipping point. If you're not cheating on me, then explain why everything you do lately screams otherwise. For a split second, I thought she might actually confess. Her face softened, and she opened her mouth as if to say something, but then she shook her head. I can't believe you don't trust me, she said quietly, her voice trembling. And just like that, the tears started. I've been killing myself trying to get ready for this competition, and instead of supporting me, you're accusing me of. God, I don't even want to say it, she cried, wiping at her eyes dramatically. It was classic Jessica. Whenever she got caught in a tough spot, she'd flip the script and make herself the victim. Normally it worked. But this time? I wasn't buying it. Cut the act, Jess, I said, my patience wearing thin. This isn't about me not supporting you. It's about the fact that you've been lying to me. If nothing's going on, then prove it. Show me your phone. Her tears stopped as quickly as they started. She looked at me like I'd just insulted her entire family. Are you serious? She snapped. You want to go through my phone now? That's such an invasion of privacy. Privacy? I repeated, incredulous. You're my wife, Jessica. We're supposed to trust each other. If you have nothing to hide, why is this such a big deal? She clutched her phone tightly, her knuckles turning white. Because it's the principle, Mike. I shouldn't have to prove my innocence just because you're insecure. The word, insecure, hit me like a slap in the face. It was meant to disarm me, to make me question myself, but instead, it only fueled my suspicion. Fine, I said, my voice cold. Keep your phone. But don't expect me to ignore what I saw tonight. If you're not going to tell me the truth, I'll find it myself. Jessica's jaw tightened, and for a moment, We just stared at each other, the air between us crackling with tension. Finally, she huffed and stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I sat down on the couch, my head in my hands. Part of me wanted to believe her, to convince myself that I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something was going on. And if she wasn't going to give me answers, I was going to get them on my own. The confrontation with Jessica left me feeling more determined than ever. If she wasn't going to be honest, I needed to find the truth myself. I stayed up late that night, replaying every suspicious moment in my head, the secretive phone behavior, the new gym outfits, the late-night sessions with Matt. It all painted a clear picture, but I needed proof. The next morning, Jessica was acting like nothing had happened. She greeted me with a cheery, "Good morning," and went about making coffee as if she hadn't stormed off the night before. It was infuriating, but I kept my cool. I wasn't ready for another argument, not yet. While she was in the shower, I decided to check her gym bag. It felt wrong, like I was crossing some invisible line, but I reminded myself that she was the one who'd been sneaking around. If there was nothing to hide, I wouldn't find anything. Inside, I found the usual stuff: workout clothes, a water bottle, protein bars, but tucked into the side pocket was a receipt from a nearby hotel. My heart sank as I unfolded it and saw the date, just a week ago, on one of her late-night gym sessions. I stuffed the receipt back into the bag and closed it, my hands shaking. This wasn't concrete proof, but it was enough to confirm what I already suspected. Jessica wasn't just lying to me, she was seeing Matt outside of the gym. That night, I decided to test her. After dinner, I casually mentioned that I might start joining her at the gym. "Maybe I'll sign up for a few sessions with Matt," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "He sounds like a great trainer." Her reaction was immediate. She froze mid-bite, then forced a laugh. "Oh, I don't think you'd like Matt," she said, avoiding my eyes. "He's really intense. Probably not your style." "Intense, huh?" I said, watching her squirm. "Well, I've been thinking about getting in better shape. Maybe I'll just tag along one night and see how he trains you." She put down her fork and looked at me, her expression tight. "Mike, you don't need a trainer. You're fine the way you are. And honestly, the gym's kind of my thing. It's where I unwind, you know." There it was again, her defensiveness, her attempt to shut me down before I could dig any deeper. "That's fair," I said, letting it go for the moment. But inside, I was seething. She was lying to my face, and I couldn't take it anymore. The next day, I decided to check our shared bank account. Jessica usually handled our finances, so I hadn't paid much attention to her spending before. But now, I wanted to see if there was a pattern. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Over the past few months, there were multiple charges to the same hotel, as well as unexplained withdrawals that didn't match any of her usual expenses. I screenshot everything and saved it to a folder on my laptop. If she wasn't going to admit to what she was doing, I'd have all the evidence I needed when the time came. But I wasn't done yet. That evening, I installed a basic monitoring app on her phone while she was distracted watching TV. It felt like a last resort, and I hated that it had come to this, but I needed to know for sure. What I found over the next few days shattered any lingering doubts I had. The app captured deleted messages between Jessica and Matt, messages she clearly thought I'd never see. They weren't outright explicit, but they were flirty enough to make my stomach turn. "Matt, can't wait to see you tonight. You always make my day." Jessica, "Your trouble face blowing kiss. Matt, totally worth it. Let's keep this our little secret." There it was. Proof. The text confirmed everything I'd suspected. This wasn't just a professional relationship, it was an affair, plain and simple. Now, I had to decide how to confront her again. This time, there would be no denials, no excuses. I had everything I needed to lay it all out in front of her. A few days after discovering the texts, I decided it was time to confront Jessica again. This time, I wasn't going to give her any wiggle room to lie or manipulate the situation. I had the hotel receipts, the bank statements, and the screenshots of her texts with Matt. There was no way she could talk her way out of this. It was a Saturday evening, and Jessica was getting ready for another late-night training session. She was in the bedroom packing her gym bag while I sat in the living room, trying to calm the storm of emotions building inside me. When she came out, dressed in one of her new, overly revealing workout outfits, I couldn't hold back any longer. "Jessica," I said, my voice firm. "We need to talk. Right now." She glanced at her watch and sighed. "Can it wait? I'm going to be late for my session with Matt." "No," I said, standing up. "It can't. Sit down." Her eyes narrowed. "Why are you being so dramatic? What is this about?" I motioned to the couch, and after a moment of hesitation, she sat down. I stayed standing, pacing in front of her like a prosecutor about to make his case. "I know what's going on," I said, locking eyes with her. "You and Matt. The late nights, the hotel visits, the texts. I know everything, Jessica." Her face turned pale, and for a moment, I thought she might finally come clean. But instead, she scoffed and crossed her arms. "You're being ridiculous. Matt is my trainer. That's it. You've built this whole narrative in your head, and it's not true." "Really?" I said, pulling out my phone. I opened the folder where I'd saved all the evidence and handed it to her. "Explain these, then." She stared at the screen, her expression shifting from shock to panic as she scrolled through the texts and screenshots. When she got to the hotel receipt, she froze. "Mike, she started, but I cut her off. "Don't. Just don't. I want the truth, Jessica. No more lies, no more excuses. Are you having an affair with Matt?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might actually tell me the truth. But then she doubled down. "I can't believe you went through my phone," she said, her voice trembling. "That's such a violation of privacy. You're acting like a complete psycho, Mike." "A psycho?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been sneaking around with your trainer, lying to my face for months, and I'm the psycho?" Her tears turned into full-blown sobs. "I made a mistake, okay? I was lonely, and Matt was there for me. But it didn't mean anything. I swear, it was just a stupid fling. Please, Mike, don't let this ruin us." I stared at her, my chest tight with a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. "It didn't mean anything?" I said, my voice cracking. "Jessica, you didn't just betray me. You destroyed my trust, my faith in you, in us. How do you expect me to come back from that?" She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Mike, please," she begged. "I'll end it with Matt. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Just give me a chance." I shook my head, the weight of her betrayal crushing me. "It's too late for that," I said. "You made your choice, Jessica. And now I'm making mine. I'm done." Her sobs grew louder as the reality of what I was saying sank in. "You don't mean that," she said, her voice desperate. "I do," I said, standing up. "I'll be contacting a lawyer on Monday. This marriage is over." I walked out of the room before she could say anything else, shutting the door behind me. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of clarity. It hurt like hell, but I knew I was doing the right thing. After Jessica moved out, I was left alone with the wreckage of our marriage. Watching her pack her things was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. She was methodical, almost detached, as she folded clothes, boxed up her belongings, and decided what to leave behind. Occasionally, she'd glance at me with red-rimmed eyes, as though hoping I'd stop her. I didn't. When she finally walked out the door, her car loaded with the physical remnants of 8 years together, the silence in the house was deafening. The dogs padded around, confused, whining at the door as if they expected her to come back. I sat on the couch for what felt like hours, staring at nothing, trying to process what had just happened. I thought I'd feel a sense of relief once she was gone, like I'd finally gotten rid of a weight I'd been carrying for months. Instead, it felt like mourning. Mourning the person I thought Jessica was. Mourning the life we'd built together, the plans we'd made, and the future I'd imagined. Jessica's absence didn't mean the drama was over. She texted constantly, alternating between apologetic and angry. "Mike, I'm sorry for everything." One message read, "I know I hurt you, but I love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this." 2 hours later, I'd get another one. "You're being so cold. I can't believe you're throwing away our marriage without even trying. You're just as much to blame for this as I am." It was exhausting, but I ignored most of her messages. I knew responding would only drag me back into the chaos, and I couldn't afford that, not emotionally, not mentally. The first week after she left, I barely slept. I'd lie awake replaying everything in my head, wondering how I'd missed the signs, how I'd let things get to this point. I kept asking myself if there was something I could have done differently. If I'd been more attentive, more present, more anything, would this have happened? But every time I went down that rabbit hole, I reminded myself of one thing: Jessica made her choices. This wasn't on me. Meanwhile, word of our separation started to spread among friends and family. My parents were supportive, though I could tell they were shocked. They'd always liked Jessica and thought we had the perfect marriage. When I told them about the affair, my mom was furious on my behalf, while my dad offered quiet support, telling me I was doing the right thing by walking away. Friends were another story. Most were understanding, but a few, particularly mutual friends, weren't so kind. One of them, Lauren, reached out to me with what she called Jessica's side of the story. "She said you were emotionally distant," Lauren began, her tone hesitant. "That she felt neglected, and Matt was just there for her when she needed someone." It took everything in me not to explode. I kept my voice calm but firm. "Lauren, you don't know the full story. Jessica wasn't neglected. She had every opportunity to talk to me, to work on our marriage. Instead, she chose to lie and cheat. That's on her, not me." Lauren muttered something about how she didn't want to take sides, but it was clear where her loyalties lay. I realized then that I'd lose more than just a wife in this divorce. I'd lose some friends too. And honestly, I was okay with that. If they couldn't see through Jessica's lies, they weren't people I needed in my life. Despite the pain and the drama, there were moments of clarity too. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I started reclaiming the house, rearranging furniture, boxing up things that reminded me of Jessica, and making the space feel like mine again. It was small, but it was a step forward. I also threw myself into work and spent more time with friends who truly had my back. My best friend, Dave, was a godsend. He'd come over with beers, sit with me while I vented, and remind me that I wasn't alone in this. "She's not worth it, man," he said one night. "You deserve someone who's honest, who actually values you. Not someone who sneaks around with her trainer and then blames you for it." He was right, of course. But it was easier said than done. Moving on from 8 years of marriage wasn't something I could do overnight. And then there were the dogs. They seemed to sense something was wrong and stayed glued to my side, their goofy antics providing a much-needed distraction. They were my constant, my reminder that not everything in my life had fallen apart. Still, every time Jessica's name popped up on my phone, a part of me ached. As angry and hurt as I was, I couldn't just erase the history we'd shared. But I knew that responding to her would only drag me back into the chaos, and I couldn't afford that, not emotionally, not mentally. The house was quiet, but in that quiet, I started to find a strange sense of peace. It wasn't easy, and the road ahead still felt uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. In the weeks after Jessica moved out, she became relentless. Her texts and calls didn't slow down. In fact, they became more frequent and increasingly desperate. At first, she alternated between guilt-tripping me and begging for forgiveness. "Mike, I know I messed up," one text read. "But we've been through so much together. Don't you think we owe it to ourselves to at least try?" The next day, I'd wake up to a completely different tone. "I can't believe you're being so cold about this. Do I even matter to you anymore?" It was exhausting. I'd blocked her number once but felt guilty when I thought about the logistics of the divorce and how we need to communicate. So instead, I started screening her calls and letting most of her messages sit unanswered. But Jessica wasn't done. One Friday night, she showed up at the house unannounced. The dog started barking like crazy, and when I opened the door, there she was, tears streaming down her face, clutching a bottle of wine like it was a peace offering. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, but another part, the part that remembered the good times, the love we once shared, wanted answers. "Fine," I said finally, stepping aside. "But this doesn't change anything." She sat down on the couch, her eyes darting around the room like she was trying to gauge whether her absence had left a mark. "I know I've hurt you," she began, her voice cracking. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to understand. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. "You didn't mean to cheat on me with your trainer? You didn't mean to lie to my face for months? Enlighten me, Jessica." Her tears started flowing again, and she buried her face in her hands. "I was lonely," she said through sobs. "You've been so busy with work and everything else. I felt like I didn't matter anymore. And Matt, he made me feel seen." "Seen?" I repeated, my voice rising. "So your solution was to sneak around behind my back and destroy everything we built together? That's not loneliness, Jessica, that's selfishness." She looked up at me, her face streaked with mascara. "I know I made the wrong choice. But it wasn't all bad, Mike. We had good times, didn't we? Can't we get back to that?" Her words hit me harder than I expected. Yes, we'd had good times, great ones even. But those memories were now tainted by her betrayal. "I don't think you understand," I said, my voice firm. "You didn't just cheat, Jessica. You broke my trust. And without trust, there's no foundation for anything else." She started sobbing again, this time louder, more dramatic. "I'll go to therapy," she said. "I'll do anything. Please, Mike, don't let this be the end." I shook my head, the heaviness in my chest making it hard to speak. "This is the end, Jessica. I've made my decision. You need to accept that." She stayed for a few more minutes, trying every angle, apologies, promises, even veiled threats about how hard the divorce would be. But when it became clear I wasn't budging, she finally got up and left, slamming the door behind her. I sat on the couch for a long time after she was gone, the wine bottle still sitting untouched on the coffee table. Her visit had stirred up a lot of emotions, but if anything, it solidified my resolve. I wasn't going back. Jessica's unannounced visit marked a turning point. She finally seemed to accept that I wasn't going to change my mind, and her attempts to win me back slowed down, though they didn't stop entirely. The texts and calls became less frequent but more calculated. She started using phrases like, "Think of everything we've built together, or you'll regret this once the dust settles." It was manipulative, but I saw through it. Meanwhile, the divorce process officially began. My lawyer, Amy, was a rock. She didn't sugarcoat anything, and while her bluntness stung at times, it was exactly what I needed. "We'll file based on the grounds of adultery," Amy explained during our first in-depth meeting. "The evidence you've collected is strong, but be prepared, she might contest it or try to spin the narrative. You need to stay calm and focus on the facts." I nodded, clutching the folder of evidence I'd gathered. The texts, the bank statements, and the hotel receipts felt like a lifeline in this storm. Jessica didn't take the filing well. When she was served with the papers, she called me immediately, her voice a mix of fury and desperation. "Adultery?" she snapped. "Are you seriously putting that on record? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" "Yes, Jessica," I replied calmly. "I'm putting it on record because it's the truth. You should have thought about that before you started sneaking around with Matt." She let out a bitter laugh. "You're not exactly blameless, Mike. You ignored me for months, made me feel invisible. If you'd been a better husband, maybe I wouldn't have." "Stop," I interrupted, my voice firm. This isn't about me. This is about your choices. Take responsibility for once. She hung up on me, but her words lingered. For days I replayed that conversation in my head, wondering if there was any truth to what she said. Had I really neglected her? Could I have done something to prevent all this? Therapy helped me work through those thoughts. I'd started seeing a therapist, Dr. Ellis, shortly after the confrontation, and our sessions became a safe space for me to unpack everything. Self-reflection is important, Dr. Ellis said during one session. But don't let her shift the blame. A healthy marriage is built on communication. If she felt neglected, it was her responsibility to talk to you, not to cheat. Those words stuck with me. For the first time in weeks, I started to let go of the guilt. The divorce process itself was grueling. Jessica tried to fight the adultery claim, arguing that my emotional neglect had pushed her toward Matt. But Amy shut that down quickly. We have irrefutable evidence, Amy told me after one of the hearings. She's grasping at straws. Jessica eventually realized she couldn't win and agreed to mediation. During those sessions, sitting across from her was like looking at a stranger. The woman I'd once loved, the woman I thought I'd spend my life with, was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Still, there were moments when I caught glimpses of the old Jessica. Once, during a particularly tense session, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "I never wanted this to happen, Mike. I wish I could take it all back." For a split second, I felt a pang of sympathy. But then I remembered the lies, the betrayal, and the months of deception. Whatever regret she felt now wasn't enough to undo the damage she'd caused. By the time the papers were signed and the divorce was finalized, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I was free, but I was also starting over from scratch. Once the divorce was finalized, I was left with a strange, bittersweet freedom. The weight of months of betrayal, anger, and legal battles had finally lifted, but in its place was a hollow, unfamiliar space. For years, my life had been intertwined with Jessica's, our routines, our plans, even our fights. Now, there was only me. The house felt like a monument to what we'd built together, and what had ultimately crumbled. Jessica had taken most of the furniture we'd picked out as a couple, the sleek leather couch she adored, the coffee table we spent a full Saturday arguing about at the furniture store, and even the throw pillows she insisted made the living room pop. What remained was a shell, but it wasn't entirely unwelcome. I took the emptiness as an opportunity. The beige walls she'd loved? Gone. I spent an entire weekend painting them shades of deep blue and slate gray, colors that felt calmer, more like me. I rearranged the furniture that was left, bought a new couch, and replaced the generic prints on the walls with art that spoke to me. It wasn't just redecorating, it was reclaiming. The dogs were my saving grace. They seemed to sense the change in the house, sticking closer to me than ever. On days when the silence felt overwhelming, they were there, wagging their tails or nudging me to take them for a walk. I made it a point to take them out more often, exploring trails and parks I'd never bothered with before. They became my anchors, reminding me that life, no matter how appended, still had its simple joys. Reconnecting with friends was another lifeline. Over the years, my social circle had dwindled, partly due to the natural ebb and flow of life and partly because Jessica and I had different priorities. But now, I was reaching out more. Dave, my best friend since college, stepped up in ways I'll never forget. "You've got a blank slate, man," he told me one night as we sat in his backyard, beers in hand. "Use it. Do the stuff you've always wanted to do. Forget Jessica for a minute. Who's Mike without her?" It was a question I hadn't asked myself in years. For so long, my identity had been tied to our relationship. I'd made compromises, let go of hobbies, and tailored my life to fit what I thought a good husband should be. Now I had the chance to figure out who I was on my own terms. I started small, signing up for a rock climbing class at a local gym. It was something I'd always been curious about but never had the time, or courage, to try. The first few sessions were brutal. My arms ached, my legs wobbled, and I spent more time clinging to the wall in terror than actually climbing. But I kept at it, and each time I reached the top of a climb, I felt a rush of accomplishment I hadn't experienced in years. Therapy remained a cornerstone of my healing. Dr. Ellis was patient but firm, helping me navigate the emotional minefield left by Jessica's betrayal. "You're grieving two losses," she said during one session. "The loss of your marriage and the loss of the person you thought Jessica was. Both are valid, and both take time to process." Her words resonated deeply. I'd been so focused on the affair, on the anger and betrayal, that I hadn't allowed myself to mourn the good times Jessica and I had shared. We weren't always at odds. There were moments of laughter, love, and genuine connection, moments that, despite everything, still mattered. But therapy also helped me see the cracks that had always been there. I realized how much of myself I'd lost in trying to make the marriage work. Jessica's needs, her ambitions, her preferences had often taken precedence, while I'd quietly pushed mine aside. As the weeks turned into months, I started building a routine that felt uniquely mine. I went on weekend hikes with Dave, signed up for a photography class, and even started cooking for myself instead of relying on takeout. It felt strange at first, but gradually it became empowering. Socially, things remained complicated. Mutual friends were split. Some supported me wholeheartedly, while others bought into Jessica's narrative of being neglected. One friend, Lauren, even reached out to share Jessica's perspective. She said she felt invisible. Lauren told me during a coffee meetup that you were so caught up in your own world she didn't feel like you cared anymore. I clenched my jaw but stayed calm. Lauren, she didn't come to me with those feelings. She went to Matt. That's not neglect, that's betrayal. Lauren nodded, looking uncomfortable. I just thought you should know what she's saying. It was infuriating, but it also reinforced something Dr. Ellis had told me. People will see what they want to see. I couldn't control Jessica's narrative, but I could control how I responded to it. Jessica's attempts to reach out also persisted. Though her texts and calls had slowed, they still came, short, carefully crafted messages meant to tug at my emotions. I hope you're doing okay, she wrote in one message. I know I can't fix what I broke, but I still care about you, Mike. Always will. Another time, she emailed. I wish things had gone differently. I'll always regret the way I hurt you. I hope you can forgive me someday. At first, I ignored her. But one message stood out. I know forgiveness won't change what happened, but I think it might help you let go. Not for me, for you. It was the first thing she'd said that felt genuine. I wasn't ready to forgive her yet, but it made me think about what forgiveness might mean for me. Slowly, I began to feel like myself again, or maybe for the first time, I was discovering who I truly was. The grief didn't disappear overnight, but with each passing day, it loosened its grip. The house, once a painful reminder of what I'd lost, began to feel like home again, a space where I could rebuild, redefine, and start fresh. As time passed, the emptiness in my life started to feel less like a void and more like a blank canvas. I had mourned the loss of my marriage, wrestled with the anger and betrayal, and confronted my own insecurities. Now I was ready to move forward, not just to survive, but to thrive. One of the most liberating parts of this journey was the realization that I didn't need to rush anything. For the first time in years, I wasn't living by someone else's timeline. There was no pressure to meet expectations, no need to compromise for the sake of harmony. It was just me, rebuilding at my own pace. I threw myself into hobbies and passions I'd neglected during my marriage. Rock climbing became more than just a new activity, it became a metaphor for my life. Each climb was a challenge, a test of perseverance, and a reminder that even when the path seemed impossible, I could find my way. Photography, another long-abandoned interest, also became a significant part of my healing. I started with small outings, local parks, city streets, the dogs playing in the yard, and eventually built up the courage to explore farther afield. Capturing moments through my lens helped me see the world differently. It reminded me that beauty could be found in even the smallest, simplest things. Socially, I began reconnecting with people who had always been in my corner. Dave remained my rock, always ready with a sarcastic quip or a blunt piece of advice when I needed it. My parents, who had been quietly supportive throughout the divorce, encouraged me to visit more often. Even my sister, who lived a few states away, invited me to spend a long weekend with her family, giving me a much-needed change of scenery. At work, I poured myself into new projects. It wasn't about distraction anymore, it was about building something meaningful. My colleagues noticed the change, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely proud of the work I was doing. But not everything was smooth sailing. Jessica's occasional texts and emails continued, though they became less frequent over time. One message, in particular, stood out. "I saw your climbing photos," she wrote. "You look happy. I'm glad you're finding yourself again, Mike. I'm sorry for everything." It was short, almost too simple, but it struck a chord. Her words didn't undo the pain she'd caused, but they carried a sincerity that felt different from her earlier attempts at contact. I didn't reply. I didn't feel the need to. Forgiveness, I was learning, didn't require reconciliation. It was something I could give to myself, a way to let go of the anger and bitterness so I could fully embrace my new life. About 6 months after the divorce, I decided to dip my toes back into the dating pool. It wasn't something I rushed into. I knew I still had work to do on myself. But I also knew that I didn't want to close myself off to the possibility of love again. I started small, joining a few dating apps and going on casual coffee dates. Most of them didn't go anywhere, but they were a good way to remind myself that I was still capable of connecting with people. Then, one day, I met Rachel. Rachel was different from the start. She was kind, down to earth, and refreshingly honest. On our first date, we talked for hours about everything: our favorite books, the places we wanted to travel, the lessons we'd learned from past relationships. There was no pretense, no games, just an easy, genuine connection. I told her about my divorce early on, not wanting to hide anything. Her response was understanding and empathetic. "It sounds like you've been through a lot," she said. "But it also sounds like you've come out of it stronger." We decided to take things slow, both of us valuing the idea of building something real and sustainable. Rachel wasn't just a breath of fresh air, she was proof that life could move forward in ways I never expected. The road to this point hadn't been easy. There were moments when I thought I'd never feel whole again, when the weight of betrayal and loss felt too heavy to bear. But now, standing on the other side of it all, I could see how much I'd grown. The experience taught me to value honesty, to trust my instincts, and to never settle for less than I deserve. It reminded me that even in the darkest moments there's a path forward, one that leads to healing, discovery, and eventually happiness. Rachel and I continued to take things slow, building a foundation that felt steady and genuine. She was patient, never pushing me to move faster than I was comfortable with. That patience gave me room to rediscover parts of myself that had been dormant for years, not just hobbies or interests, but my ability to trust, to open up, and to hope. Our dates were refreshingly simple. Sometimes we'd grab coffee and wander through a park, talking about everything from childhood memories to wild travel dreams. Other times, we'd cook dinner together. Well, mostly Rachel cooked, and I played sous chef. She had this way of making ordinary moments feel special, like they mattered. One evening, we went rock climbing together. I was nervous at first, worried she might find my beginner skills underwhelming, but she didn't seem to care. She was surprisingly good, scaling the wall with a mix of grace and determination. "You've been holding out on me," I teased when she reached the top. She laughed, dangling from the rope as she looked down at me. "What can I say? I'm full of surprises." Moments like that reminded me why I'd taken a chance on dating again. It wasn't about replacing what I'd lost, it was about discovering something new, something better. But as wonderful as things were with Rachel, I still had moments of doubt. The scars from my marriage weren't completely healed, and there were times when insecurity crept in. Would I be able to fully trust again? Was I capable of giving someone the love they deserved? I brought these concerns up with Dr. Ellis during one of our sessions. It's normal to feel hesitant after what you've been through, she said. Trust is something that's rebuilt over time. The fact that you're even asking these questions shows how much you've grown. You're not rushing into this blindly, you're being thoughtful and intentional. That's a good thing. Her words stuck with me. I didn't need to have all the answers right away. I just needed to keep moving forward, one step at a time. Beyond my relationship with Rachel, I continued to focus on myself. The house was now fully my own, a space that reflected who I was and who I was becoming. The walls were adorned with photos from my hiking trips and a few of my favorite climbing shots. I'd even started a small herb garden on the patio, a far cry from the life Jessica and I had shared, but a life that felt uniquely mine. I also started reconnecting with old friends, people I hadn't seen in years because I'd been so caught up in my marriage. It was humbling to realize how many people were still there for me, willing to pick up where we'd left off. One night, over beers with Dave, he asked me something that caught me off guard. Do you think you'll ever forgive Jessica? I took a long sip of my drink, thinking about the question. A year ago, I would have said no without hesitation. But now, I think I already have, I said slowly. Not for her, but for me. Holding on to that anger doesn't serve me anymore. I don't want to carry it around for the rest of my life. Dave nodded, a small smile on his face. That's growth, man. Proud of you. It felt good to say it out loud, to acknowledge that forgiveness wasn't about excusing what Jessica had done, but about freeing myself from the weight of it. Rachel and I continued to grow closer, and with each passing day, I felt more certain that I'd found something real. She wasn't just kind or funny or beautiful, she was someone who understood me, who accepted my past without letting it define our present. One weekend, we took a road trip to a nearby mountain range. We spent the days hiking, climbing, and snapping photos of the stunning views, and the evenings curled up by the fire in a cozy little cabin. As we sat under the stars on our last night, Rachel turned to me with a soft smile. You seem happy, she said. I am, I replied, realizing it was true. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. The road trip with Rachel marked a turning point. For so long, I'd carried the remnants of my past, resentment, regret, and a lingering sense of, what if? But somewhere between the mountain hikes and the quiet conversations under the stars, I realized I was finally ready to let go. Jessica still lingered in small ways. Every now and then, I'd catch myself reminiscing about the life we'd shared, the plans we'd made, and the future that had once felt so certain. But those memories no longer had the power to wound me. They were just pieces of a life I'd outgrown, reminders of how far I'd come. I hadn't heard from Jessica in a few months, and I assumed she'd finally moved on as well. But one afternoon, as I was sifting through the mail, I found a letter from her. It was handwritten, which surprised me. Jessica had always been more of a text or email person, so seeing her familiar handwriting stirred something in me. I debated whether to open it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was brief, but it carried an air of finality. Mike, I've spent a long time reflecting on everything that happened between us, and I wanted to say one last thing before we both move on completely. I know I hurt you in ways I can never take back, and for that, I am deeply sorry. I made selfish choices that destroyed our marriage, and I'll carry the regret of those choices for the rest of my life. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you found some peace. You deserve happiness, and I hope you found it, or that you will soon. Thank you for the years we shared, even if they didn't end the way we imagined. Jessica. I set the letter down and stared at it for a long time. It wasn't the closure I thought I needed, but it was enough. Her apology felt genuine, and while it didn't undo the past, it brought a sense of resolution I hadn't realized I was waiting for. For the first time, I felt like I could close that chapter of my life completely. With Jessica's letter behind me, I focused fully on the present and the future. My relationship with Rachel was becoming more serious, though we were both careful to keep things grounded. We talked openly about our past, our fears, and our hopes for the future, and it was in those conversations that I realized how much I'd grown. Rachel didn't complete me, she complemented me. She wasn't a band-aid for my wounds or a replacement for what I'd lost. She was a partner in every sense of the word, someone who challenged me to be better while accepting me as I was. One evening, as we cooked dinner together, she turned to me with a thoughtful look. "Do you ever think about where you'll be in 5 or 10 years?" she asked. I smiled, setting down the cutting board. "I think about it all the time," I admitted. "But for the first time, it doesn't scare me. I don't feel like I need to have it all figured out." She smiled back, her eyes soft. "I like that. Life's more fun when it's a little unpredictable." Her words stayed with me. For so long, I'd clung to the idea of control, of having a plan, of knowing exactly where I was headed. But now, I was learning to embrace the unknown, to find joy in the journey rather than obsessing over the destination. By the 1-year anniversary of my divorce, I hardly recognized the person I'd been. I wasn't bitter or broken anymore. I was whole, stronger than I'd ever been, and genuinely happy. Rachel and I took another road trip that month, this time to a seaside town neither of us had visited before. We spent our days exploring, trying new foods, and laughing over silly mishaps like getting lost on the way to a lighthouse. On the last night, as we watched the sun set over the ocean, I realized something profound. I wasn't just living again, I was thriving. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. As the months passed, my life began to feel more like my own. It wasn't just about moving on from the pain Jessica had caused, it was about building something new and better. For the first time in years, I felt untethered from the weight of the past and excited for what the future held. Rachel and I had found a rhythm together. Our relationship wasn't rushed or overly planned, it unfolded naturally in its own time. What I appreciated most about her was her openness. She didn't shy away from hard conversations, and she encouraged me to share my thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment. With her, I felt safe in a way I hadn't in years. One evening, while we were sitting on the couch, Rachel turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about what you want long-term? Not just with us, but for yourself?" It was a simple question, but it caught me off guard. During my marriage to Jessica, long-term had been defined by shared plans, a bigger house, kids, maybe even a move to another city. But now, those plans felt like someone else's life. "I think about it a lot," I admitted. "But honestly, I'm still figuring it out. For now, I just want to keep growing, personally, professionally, emotionally. I spent so much time in a relationship where I felt like I was shrinking. I don't ever want to go back to that." Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. Growth isn't always about knowing exactly where you're going, it's about moving forward, even when the path isn't clear." Her words stuck with me. They reminded me that it was okay to take things one step at a time, to let life unfold without forcing it into a predetermined mold. Professionally, I began to feel reinvigorated. I took on a challenging project at work that pushed me out of my comfort zone, and for the first time in years, I felt proud of what I was accomplishing. I also started volunteering at a local animal shelter on weekends, inspired by the love and comfort my dogs had given me during the toughest times. Helping care for abandoned and rescued animals brought a sense of fulfillment I hadn't realized I was missing. Photography remained a constant source of joy. I began showcasing my work at small community events and even sold a few prints. Seeing strangers connect with my art reminded me of the beauty in creating something that resonated with others. One day, while I was out running errands, I bumped into Jessica. It was the first time I'd seen her in person since the divorce was finalized. She was sitting outside a cafe, engrossed in her phone, and she didn't notice me until I walked past. When she looked up and our eyes met, I saw a flicker of surprise, and maybe regret, in her expression. "Mike," she said, standing up hesitantly. "Hi." I stopped, unsure of how to feel. "Jessica," I replied. "How are you?" The conversation was brief and polite. She mentioned that she was doing okay, working on herself, and trying to move forward. There was no mention of Matt, and I didn't ask. It felt unnecessary, like dredging up something that no longer mattered. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of closure. Seeing her no longer stirred up anger or sadness. She was just a person from my past, someone who had shaped me in ways both good and bad, but who no longer held power over me. Rachel and I continued to deepen our connection, and though we hadn't talked explicitly about the future, it felt like we were heading towards something meaningful. One night, as we sat on the beach during another spontaneous weekend getaway, she took my hand and said, "I don't know where this is going, but I like where we are." "Me too," I said, squeezing her hand. "Wherever it goes, I think we'll figure it out together." Life wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. The twists and turns of the past had taught me resilience, self-awareness, and the value of being true to myself. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. As Rachel and I continued to build our relationship, I began to fully embrace the concept of letting go, not just of the pain Jessica had caused, but of the expectations I'd once placed on myself. Life didn't have to follow a specific script to be meaningful. It could be messy, unpredictable, and imperfect, and that was okay. Letting go also meant releasing the last lingering traces of resentment toward Jessica. I didn't actively think about her much anymore, but when her memory did surface, it no longer felt like a wound. Instead, it felt like an old scar, a reminder of a chapter in my life that had taught me resilience. Dr. Ellis helped me understand that forgiveness wasn't about excusing someone's actions. It was about refusing to let those actions define me. "Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself," she'd said during one session, and she was right. By forgiving Jessica, not in words, but in my heart, I freed myself from the emotional tether that had held me back for so long. One evening, Rachel surprised me by showing up at my house with a basket full of plants. "Your patio garden needs company," she said with a grin. We spent the evening planting together, laughing as we struggled to figure out how much soil was too much and whether or not the herbs would actually survive our care. When we were done, we sat back and admired our handiwork, the soft glow of string lights illuminating the little oasis we'd created. "You've got a knack for this," Rachel said, leaning back in her chair. I smiled, glancing at her. "Maybe it's because I finally feel like I'm planting roots again, in more ways than one." She reached over and took my hand, and in that quiet moment I realized just how far I'd come. As our relationship deepened, so did my confidence in my ability to trust again. But trust, I learned, wasn't something that came without effort. It required vulnerability, a willingness to be open, even when fear and doubt whispered otherwise. One night, Rachel and I had a heart-to-heart about our fears. She admitted she'd been hurt in past relationships too, though not in the same way I had. "Sometimes I worry that I'll get too comfortable, that I'll let my guard down and get hurt again," she said softly. Her honesty struck a chord. "I know that feeling," I replied. "But I also know that keeping your guard up all the time keeps the good stuff out too. I don't want to live like that anymore." It wasn't just words. With Rachel, I made a conscious effort to be open, to share my thoughts and feelings instead of burying them like I had in the past. And she met me there, creating a space where trust could flourish naturally. Life wasn't without its challenges. Work deadlines piled up, unexpected expenses cropped up, and there were moments when the weight of everything felt overwhelming. But I approached these challenges differently now. Instead of spiraling into frustration or self-doubt, I faced them with a quiet confidence I hadn't known I possessed. Even my social circle began to shift. The friends who stuck by me during the divorce became more like family, and I made new connections through the hobbies I'd rediscovered. My photography even caught the attention of a local gallery, which invited me to showcase a few pieces in an upcoming exhibit. The opening night of the exhibit was a surreal experience. Seeing my work displayed on the walls, with people admiring and discussing it, felt like a culmination of the journey I'd been on. Rachel was there, beaming with pride, and so were Dave and a handful of other close friends. "You've come a long way, Mike," Dave said as he clapped me on the back. "This is just the beginning." He was right. As Rachel and I walked home that night, hand in hand, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life had thrown me into the depths, but I'd climbed my way out stronger and more self-assured than ever. "I've been thinking," Rachel said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Maybe we should plan a big trip together. Something adventurous. What do you think?" I grinned. "I think that sounds perfect. Where do you want to go?" "Everywhere," she replied with a laugh. "But let's start with somewhere new for both of us. A fresh adventure." A fresh adventure. That's exactly what my life had become. It wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about honoring it as part of my story while looking forward to the chapters yet to be written. And with Rachel by my side, I knew those chapters would be worth the wait. Planning a trip with Rachel felt like stepping into a new phase of life, a chapter defined by discovery, joy, and shared experiences. After weeks of throwing ideas back and forth, we finally settled on a destination, the Pacific Northwest. Neither of us had been there before, and the promise of towering forests, rugged coastlines, and quaint little towns felt like the perfect blend of adventure and tranquility. The weeks leading up to the trip were filled with excitement. Rachel and I spent evenings poring over guidebooks, watching travel vlogs, and mapping out hikes and scenic drives. It was refreshing to plan something that was entirely for us, not dictated by expectations or compromises, but driven by what we genuinely wanted to explore together. When the day of the trip finally arrived, I felt an unfamiliar mix of exhilaration and calm. Boarding the plane with Rachel by my side, I realized how different this journey felt from the ones I'd taken in my past. There was no underlying tension, no pressure to make everything perfect. It was simply an opportunity to live in the moment with someone who valued the same things I did. Our first stop was a small coastal town nestled between rocky cliffs and the ocean. We rented a cozy cabin with large windows that framed the view of the waves crashing against the shore. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of salt and pine, and the sound of seagulls provided a soothing backdrop. On our second day, we tackled a hike that was more challenging than we'd anticipated. The trail wound through dense forests and steep inclines, eventually leading to a breathtaking overlook. Standing there, with the vast expanse of ocean stretching out before us, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. "This is incredible," Rachel said, her voice quiet but filled with awe. I nodded, taking it all in. "It's moments like this that remind me how much beauty there is in the world. And how lucky I am to share it with you." She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. "I'm lucky too. Not everything went smoothly, of course. One morning, we got hopelessly lost on a winding country road trying to find a hidden waterfall. The GPS gave up on us, and we ended up in a tiny town that seemed to have more cows than people. Instead of getting frustrated, we laughed about it and decided to make the best of the detour. We found a charming little diner where the waitress served us pancakes the size of our heads and gave us directions that actually worked. By the time we reached the waterfall, it felt like we'd earned the view. Rachel's ability to roll with the punches impressed me. She didn't let the little hiccups ruin the bigger picture, and her positivity was infectious. It reminded me of how much I'd changed too. The old me might have let the detour sour my mood, but now, I was learning to embrace life's unpredictability. The trip wasn't just about exploring new places, it was about deepening our connection. In the quiet moments between hikes and road trips, Rachel and I talked about our dreams, our fears, and the things that mattered most to us. One night, as we sat by the fireplace in our cabin, she asked me a question that stayed with me. "Do you feel like you've fully healed from everything with Jessica?" It was a question I hadn't asked myself in a while. I thought about it carefully before answering. "I think I have," I said finally. "Not because I've forgotten what happened, but because I've accepted it. It's part of my story, but it doesn't define me anymore. I'm not carrying the weight of it like I used to." Rachel nodded, her gaze steady. "That's good to hear. I think part of why we work so well is because we're both willing to face our pasts instead of running from them." She was right. Our shared willingness to be honest, both with ourselves and each other, was a cornerstone of our relationship. By the end of the trip, I felt more centered than I had in years. The Pacific Northwest had been everything we'd hoped for and more, but it wasn't just the scenery or the adventure that made it special. It was the way Rachel and I had grown together, the way we'd made space for each other's quirks, dreams, and vulnerabilities. As we boarded the plane home, I felt a sense of anticipation for the future. This trip had been a stepping stone, a glimpse of what life could be when lived fully and authentically. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And I couldn't wait to see where the next adventure would take me. Returning home from the trip felt like stepping into a new chapter of my life. The memories Rachel and I had made, the laughs, the challenges, the quiet moments of connection, were more than just a collection of good times. They were a reminder of how far I'd come, of how much I'd grown since my life was shattered. Rachel and I began to weave those shared experiences into the fabric of our everyday lives. We found ourselves planning small weekend getaways, exploring local hiking trails, and even volunteering together at the animal shelter where I'd been spending time. She quickly became a favorite among the staff and the dogs, her natural warmth and kindness shining through in everything she did. At home, we settled into an easy rhythm. She didn't move in right away. We both valued our independence and wanted to give our relationship the space to evolve naturally. But she spent more time at my place, and with each visit it felt more like our space. One night, as we sat on the couch with the dogs sprawled at our feet, Rachel looked at me with a soft smile. "You seem different," she said, her voice thoughtful. "Different how?" I asked, curious. "Lighter," she replied. "Like you're not carrying the weight of the past anymore. It's good to see." Her observation struck a chord. She was right. The anger, the resentment, and the bitterness that had once consumed me were gone. In their place was a sense of peace and gratitude, not just for Rachel, but for the life I was building. Over time, Rachel and I began talking about the future, not in vague hypotheticals, but in real, actionable terms. We discussed what we wanted out of life, where we saw ourselves in the years to come, and how we could support each other in reaching those goals. For Rachel, it was about pursuing her passion for art. She'd always been creative, but she'd never had the confidence to showcase her work. Together, we brainstormed ways to turn her dream into reality, and I encouraged her to take the leap. For me, it was about continuing to grow, both personally and professionally. The photography exhibit had sparked something in me, and I wanted to explore that further. I began taking on small freelance projects, capturing moments for people who wanted to preserve their memories in a unique way. Through it all, Rachel was my biggest cheerleader, just as I was hers. One day, while organizing some old boxes, I stumbled across a photo album from my marriage with Jessica. For a moment, I considered tossing it, but something stopped me. Instead, I sat down and flipped through the pages. The photos didn't sting the way I thought they might. Instead, they felt like relics of a life that had shaped me but no longer defined me. There were smiles and moments of happiness captured in those pages, but they didn't overshadow the lessons I'd learned since then. I decided to keep the album, not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a testament to the person I'd become. A few months later, Rachel and I took another big step. We decided to move in together. It wasn't a decision we made lightly, but it felt right. Her presence in my life had become a source of joy and stability, and the idea of sharing a home with her felt natural. The move was a whirlwind of packing, unpacking, and making the house feel like ours. We blended our styles, incorporated pieces of both our lives, and created a space that reflected who we were together. Life wasn't perfect, it never is, but it was full, rich, and meaningful in ways I hadn't thought possible a year ago. Looking back, the journey from heartbreak to healing wasn't linear, and it wasn't easy. But it was worth it. The pain, the growth, the rediscovery of who I was, it all led me to this moment, to this life that felt authentically mine. Rachel wasn't my savior, and she didn't fix me. What she did was show me that love, when it's honest and mutual, can be a source of strength, not a burden. As we stood together in our newly shared home, surrounded by the dogs and the chaos of unpacked boxes, I realized something. I wasn't just happy, I was whole. Life wasn't about erasing the past, it was about embracing it as part of the story that had brought me here. And now, with Rachel by my side and a future full of possibility ahead, I couldn't wait to see what came next.